Hey, this is LOA Today, the Law of Attraction show. Welcome to LOA Today. My name is Walt. Joel Elston is not here. We thought we had him back, but Joel's got to take a couple more weeks because, as many listeners know, he has a new gig. He is now the director of a relatively new and up-and-coming facility in the Richmond, Virginia area, and he's trying to settle in. He's trying to solve a whole bunch of problems all at once, following immediately after the death of his mother, and, he's had a lot on his plate, so we're going to give him a couple weeks off, and in the meantime, my brother and my sister-in-law are joining me again, and this week we're going to do a little bit of book reporting, because we've both been reading some books, and the books are related to the law of attraction. So, Mark, Uohna, thank you for joining me this week.
Oh, you're welcome.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for having us.
Glad to have you. I'll tell you what my book is if you tell me what your book is. My book is a book by Shawn, who I have been a fan of ever since reading The Happiness Advantage and buying a copy of it and keeping it and rereading it over and over again. This is a sequel to it called Before Happiness, which apparently is a follow-up that came about because of his experience working with individuals and companies around the world since writing The Happiness Advantage. And trying to answer the question, what about somebody who gets that they have to be happy and they have to do all this stuff, but they just can't seem to get to the happiness zone first? What do you do in that case? That's the question he tries to answer with this book. And I guess my first reaction is, what took him so long? Let's just say I'm glad that he wrote it. And we'll go into greater detail about it as we're talking here, but this is a question I've been wrestling with for a long time, and I've been learning a lot along the way, but I'm intrigued and fascinated by what he has to say in the book. And of course, he comes with 5 steps that you can take to resolve the issue. So that's the good news too. But
okay.
What have you guys been reading?
Well, we have been reading, because I came across Neville Goddard, that's the author, his work about a year ago or less when I was in Trinidad. Mm-hmm. And I first read Feeling is the Secret. And so I borrowed from the library the complete reader, and it's a collection of all 10 of the books that Neville Goddard wrote. And so the particular one that we've been reading is Awakened Imagination, and this is where he talks about how one of the controversial statements that he makes is that your imagination and Jesus are one and the same.
That's fairly controversial, yeah.
And he goes on to talk about how he gives. For me, it was very interesting because growing up Christian, it helped me to kind of relate all the memory verses that I have learned and read before.
Sure.
To the law of attraction, But he talks about who is your imagination in chapter 1, and then he goes on to talk about. I'm trying to find the sealed instructions, and that deals with instead of thinking of or imagining the future, he says the secret is thinking from, where you actually generate the feeling and then you view the world and act from the place of your desire already having been accomplished. Yes.
So Goddard basically, he was writing in the mid 20th century, right? I'm not sure exactly what year he wrote this, but he was 40s, 50s, early 60s.
Yeah.
Right.
So this was well before the new agey version of law of attraction and spirituality and so forth.
Correct.
And it also makes sense that it would have a very strong Christian component because Christianity was it. There were no alternatives during that time period. So it makes a lot of sense.
And he grew up that way as well.
Right.
Yeah. But he also talked about how it was a struggle for him to, come to believe the way that he did, because he grew up Christian, and so when someone tried to tell him, in fact, he mentions the person who did first expose him to the idea, and his name is Abdullah, which is a very Muslim name. So he doesn't say much about the guy, but he talks about how he struggled with the idea until he fully, more by putting it in, to test in his own life, come to accept the truth of it. So.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting too, because from a pure law of attraction perspective, the Bible is actually more in tune with the teachings than the Quran is.
Exactly.
So to have a Muslim approach him about that's really fascinating.
Yeah. But what was interesting is that when he talked about it like that, then when I read certain verses in the Bible that were always a little confusing to me, they made perfect sense.
Okay. So you gained some new insight from it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Because he talked about your imagination and your ability to transcend the natural world and to go into the non-material world is what the person of Jesus Christ represents. And so there's that famous quotation where he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the light." And so he's saying that it is your imagination and your ability to transcend your natural world that is the way, the truth, and the light.
It's interesting too. His book, he dedicates it to Bill, and Bill is William Blake, and he also dedicates it to Albert Einstein and quotes Einstein saying, "Imagination is more important than knowledge."
Yes.
And the reason I find that particularly interesting is that PBS has just begun to run a series directed by Ron Howard about the life of Albert Einstein. So there's a little congruity going on here.
Yeah, in fact, it's a lot, because Mark and I, we talked about this, both being scientists of sorts, we always are fascinated by all these thought experiments, quote unquote, that Einstein carried out, and how he lived so much in his head or in his imagination, and how his powers of imagination were, there's no one else I know has ever come close to what he was able to do just in his head,
Oh, yeah.
So.
And it was controversial, too, when he first was proposing his theory of relativity, general theory, and then the special theory of relativity and so forth. It was not well received by the physics community. The scientific community in general. It was basically considered to be off the wall because it was completely out of alignment with Newtonian mechanical physics. And they didn't like that very much.
Yeah.
And he hadn't made any experiments to back it up.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Which
is kind of difficult to do when you're postulating things like what happens if one person travels 45 light years. How do you set that experiment up?
Yeah, and it's just a testament to his, strong ability to use his imagination. That's one of the things that Neville talks about. That it's an art, and it's a skill, and it's something that you have to develop. Of course, when you're a child, it's a lot easier, but when you become an adult and you've been admonished all your life to get out of your head and be realistic and stuff, and all that kind of stuff, you realize that you really you have diminished powers of imagination.
That actually reminds me, though, what he said is that it's not so much that we have diminished powers of imagination, because it turns out that we're all imagining all the time.
True, yes.
It's that we have diminished powers of controlling our imagination.
That's true, yes.
Of choosing what to imagine and to really stick with it.
Yeah, because when we worry, we imagine very well, and it just goes on and on into all the possible negative scenarios.
Yes.
And we could do that for hours.
One of the things I've noticed in the last few months about imagining, particularly related to visualizing, I discovered that I have a condition I didn't know. I am aphantasic.
What's that?
Aphantasic means, or aphantasia is a relatively new name, like within the last 3 or 4 years, a suggested name for a condition where one does not possess a functioning mind's eye and cannot visualize imagery. And I have a really hard time visualizing imagery. It's only in the last 5 or 10 years that I realized that that's unusual, that most people are capable of visualizing very clear images. I thought everybody had foggy images like me.
So I have 2 questions. One, is this something that you think existed even when you were a child?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's been like this all my life.
Okay, and for people like you, is there, quote, any hope?
It depends on who you talk to. Interestingly enough, there is a website, and I don't remember what the URL is, but it's something like FantasiaForums.org or something like that. Aphantasia Forums, but it isn't that. It's a name something similar to that. But they have a forum for people who have the same kind of condition I have. Interestingly enough, the overwhelming majority of them are extremely negative on the idea. Well, they're extremely negative, period. But they're extremely negative on the idea that you can do anything about it. There is a small minority that claims you can do something about it, and there's indeed a guru, if you will, who's published a rather extensive work on 50 different exercises you can do to improve your ability to imagine. And I can't say I've honestly tried them with conviction and with repetition the way you're supposed to. I tried them for like 2 nights and then I gave up. So I didn't really give them a fair test at all. But I can see how they would work. And I can also see, even the way I'm describing this, I'm seeing, right? I can also see how it's a skill that you can develop. It does make sense to me.
Yes.
And it particularly makes sense for my situation because growing up, I had glasses from a very early age. Okay. As Mark can tell you, a few years back, I developed macular degeneration in my left eye, so I'm effectively blind in my left eye. My right eye, thankfully, is good through special vitamins that you can take, and I've added on saffron to that. We can go into that if you want to. But the point is, through those treatments for the last 8 years, I have stabilized my situation so that my right eye, my vision is perfectly good with glasses. So that's the good news. But I suspect, and with my left eye, not only did I develop the macular degeneration, early in my life, I always had bad vision in that eye. Mm-hmm. And later in like my late 30s, early 40s, an optometrist suggested that my eye probably didn't develop fully.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And in fact, that's what they used to call lazy eye, where they would put a patch over the eye and so forth. I don't remember what the situation in my case was. I mean, when we were growing up, parents didn't usually clue us in on everything, but they clued us in on what the final result was. And the final result was I was going to have glasses. You know, okay. they left all that other discussion out. But I kind of recall that there was a little bit of discussion about doing it, and they decided not to do it. I think because they weren't convinced it was going to produce the kind of results that they were hoping for. In other words, my left eye was so badly underdeveloped that it wasn't going to really help.
Wow.
Bottom line here, where we're talking about imagination and visualizing imagery, I didn't have a lot of good experience to work with. My left eye was not helpful at all. My right eye, until I got glasses, I didn't realize I was missing out on clarity. And once I had the clarity, I think what happened was that my other senses, certain other senses, had developed to the point where I didn't feel like I needed to lean on vision as much.
Right.
So, for instance, my sense of hearing is excellent.
Okay.
And sense of touch is also excellent. In fact, I've come to realize that those two senses for me are probably accentuated more than for other people.
Yeah.
For me, the other senses, taste and smell, are not quite as strong. But bottom line is, I end up doing a lot of my visualizing abstractly and through hearing. So I can visualize hearing. I can hear, for instance, entire songs. I can hear entire orchestrations in my head. Right. And have been able to do that for a long time, ever since I can remember, really.
Wow.
And again, that was something else I thought everybody else could do, and I found out, no, they can't.
And
So I'm missing one thing, and as so often happens, I am compensated with another thing. So
Yeah.
what I found is I had to redefine what it means to visualize.
right, and that's the key. That's what I was getting to, because one of the things Neville talks about is the fact that it's about generating the feeling. You're using the visions to generate the feeling. So if you can generate the feelings through another sense, your hearing or smell or whatever, then you've effectively done the same thing.
And the feeling certainly is important because I became very good at imagining things abstractly, but abstraction doesn't have any emotional content. So that was always unsatisfying, shall we say?
Although imagining songs in your head, hearing them in your head like that,
Yeah.
that's got to be part of imagination.
It is.
And so the next question is there in your mind, are there associations between certain sounds or songs, either one, that are associated with certain emotion, especially happiness?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, music is defined in terms of how certain chord combinations create certain musical effects on the emotional system. I mean, major chords are happy chords, minor chords are sad chords. I mean, I think you don't have to be a musician to know that that's true. Most people realize that, and there are other kinds of chords too that have other kinds of emotional content. And so, for instance, you have the augmented chord, which if you were to hear it, you would say you would associate it with suspense. Or if you heard a diminished chord, you would associate that with melancholy. There are a lot of very well-established chording and melodic sequences that have very definite effects on the emotional system and the nervous system.
Yeah, and so the idea is, as I'm reading, I'm realizing that, based on what he wrote some 50 years ago and what we've learned since about how the brain works and the subconscious and all that kind of stuff. And so, like I said before, what he's trying, the goal is to get you out of the world of your senses, which is kind of strange. So it's getting you out of what you can see physically and hear, and helping you to create a world, create another world, something other than what you see every day or you hear every day or something. So whatever way you can generate that or create that, because one of the suggestions that he gave was for people who were having a difficult time, creating visuals and holding on to them for an extended period of time such that they could extend it and help it expand, was he said was to start like writing. Start with the sentence that defines the objective or the goal or the vision. Start with that and then create a story around it and just add and add more details as much as you can so that it builds and it grows and it helps you then to eventually be able to generate that feeling one way or the other.
It's interesting that a lot of gurus in the overall spiritual field and particularly within the law of attraction field talk about using writing and telling a story as a way of making this kind of connection. Yeah. They all describe it a little bit differently, but it all amounts to the same thing. Yeah. I remember the first few times I tried to sit down and start to write my story, and I found myself hitting a wall really quickly. I suspect it's a wall that a lot of people run into. And the reason that we run into the wall, well, there are two reasons for it. One, unless we as individuals are skilled storytellers, and I've actually written a novel, but I still had trouble doing this. Unless we're skilled storytellers, most of us don't know where to begin to tell a story.
True, yeah.
And secondly, storytelling is extremely powerful.
Yes.
But if you are not telling a story that you're making up, you're basically just drawing on your own experience, which is the way most writers learn how to write, by the way. They learn to write from their experience rather than just imagining stuff. So what he's talking about, it makes sense that it would work to do that, but it also makes sense that it's hard for people to get it going.
Yeah, yeah. And this is something that I think can help. It's not mentioned in the book, but just from my own experience, writing, especially creative writing. So again, you start with that defining statement, and then you try to answer the questions of what you learned in grammar school: where, when, why, how, and then you hopefully you can give descriptions of what you're hearing and what you're seeing, if you're seeing anything.
Right.
But even if you're not seeing, you can hear sounds, you can hear conversations, you can hear, like you said, you have your vision problem, but your sense of hearing is a lot more. Because I think for me, my sense of hearing is not as fully developed. I'm very what's the word? Sorry, I know there's a different word, but I feel everything. If
okay,
no, not that. I feel it like
emotionally.
I feel it. I resonate with people. I can their vibes and how things make me feel. I
think the word you're looking for is empathetic.
Okay.
Because somebody who's empathetic is somebody who taps into connecting to somebody else emotionally.
Right. But I didn't want to say empathetic because empathetic tends to limit it just to people, but it's not just the people. It's to environments, to sound.
Okay.
So like the wind, I can feel the wind, which is, I know, kind of weird, but I can feel the wind, not like on my skin, but I can feel the wind in my heart.
That's cool.
Quote unquote. Yeah, so you try to think about and write about how it makes you feel, and so like you're imagining you're going on a trip and you're imagining what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what you're doing and what people are saying around you or what other sounds there are, and then hopefully that'll help you get to what you are feeling, because that's the key. Because when you get to that place of feeling as though the dream is realized, that's when you start attracting that into your reality.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's certainly consistent with what other law of attraction teachers have told us.
Yep.
So that certainly makes sense.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting. We've been reading it, Mark and I, and kind of.
Have you tried it?
Yes, we've been trying it. I tell you, it has helped. I'll tell you one way it helped me in my writing. I'm, writing my dissertation for my PhD, and describe the process.
Yeah, that's a feeling I think most people have the first time they try to write for themselves.
Yes, exactly. It's like you have all these thoughts, and it's all everywhere, and trying to make a cohesive prose about something. It's like because if I'm talking, I ramble everywhere, kind of. But I'm trying to hold visions of me having completed the task for the day, but more importantly, feelings of me having completed the task. And that has helped me, because that feeling then, one, it alleviates the stress of all the other feelings that I go through, including being inefficient and incapable and incompetent and all that. So, I replace those feelings with the feeling of, okay, I've done it. It's done. Okay. And then I can, talk about like what I'm going to tell Mark when he gets home about how well it went, and, what I can do after I'm done, and operate from that place as opposed to, the angst of trying to get it done. And it has helped a lot.
Well, that's good. That's effective then. The idea of focusing on how it's going to feel, that also is a major theme that you hear over and over again. And the fact that you're able to pull that off is, well, first of all, it's a testament to what you were saying, that you have this strong empathy, not just for people, but for environment. And secondly, that you're able to tune into it at will. So essentially, you're tapping in with your greatest strength, which is the best way to do this stuff anyway.
Definitely, yeah.
That's something I've been trying to focus on with my hearing. How can I tie in my hearing to attract, to focus on what I want to focus on? Louise and I have been off and on. We're trying to get back on doing daily affirmations together. We also do 3 positives in the evening. That one we're pretty consistent about. But we're trying to get the morning thing going too. We had it going for a while, then we stopped. But we've got it going again this morning. And one thing that we do after we do our affirmations, we have these written affirmations that we put together. We play music. We play some sort of happy, upbeat type tune to get something going from a musical perspective in our heads. And that's just as effective, I think, as the affirmations. For me, anyway. I think for Louise, too. Because, well, first of all, it's a nice way of kind of, signing off what you've been doing. And secondly, it carries over a lot easier into the next task that you're doing. It sticks with you longer, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Or it sticks with me longer. Maybe I should put it in the first person and say, this is the way it affects me. I don't know how it's going to affect you.
Right. It's all about the feelings,
Yeah. Well, you played this morning. We played Pharrell Williams' "Happy" song, and it sticks with you. It just sticks with you. Yep. I think it probably stuck in my head for the next half hour while I was, getting onto programming class.
Oh, okay.
I used a technique a couple days ago to practice this, where I remembered some of our happier times, my happier times in my life, and I know I'm pretty sure yours too. Visiting our parents when they lived on the lake.
Oh yeah.
And going boating, and if there are times where I'm reminded of that, just because I hear something or I smell something or I see something, and it just triggers a memory.
Right.
And that happened a few days ago, and so I thought I'd go with it, and so I started to really go back and remember all those great times and on purpose. And I intentionally stuck with that throughout the day as I was going about the day.
No kidding.
And I did that explicitly to try to practice feeling from what's happening around me.
Yeah. Oh, that's a powerful place to.
Yeah, and it worked. Now, eventually it gets kind of old, It was a good first step for me.
Well, I think it probably depends on what you're remembering. I mean, one of my memories, and I'm sure you probably remember this too, we would visit the folks, of course, on the lake. And Smith Mountain Lake in Virginia, for those who don't know it, is a very lovely lake. It ranges anywhere from 1 mile to 2 miles wide, and it's about 12 miles long, and it's got all these little rivulets and so forth, all kinds of places to explore by water. So we would do a lot of boating. And one of my most vivid memories is when we would be out on the pontoon boat as a group, and we'd be out, doing some stuff, and we'd come back, and Dad would be waiting for us on the dock and waving to us as we came in. And he just did that regularly because he liked to greet us after, here we were visiting, so that was one of his ways to connect with us. Well, I have very strong emotional connection to that. So anytime I think about that, I just get this overwhelming flow of emotion. It does not matter how often I think about it. So I think it depends on what you're thinking about. What was that?
I'm curious whether you actually see your dad waving to you as you're coming in. I mean, is that a vision that you have?
It's one of the stronger visualizations I have. It's not real clear.
Okay.
It is in color, which is good. That's something I usually have trouble with. And a lot of it is abstract rather than image.
Okay.
But I can kind of piece together the one connecting image, I guess, that I'm able to lean upon as I'm remembering it is my dad had this hat that he would wear, and it was very distinctive for him. So as you're coming into the dock, one of the first things you saw was him standing there in his short sleeve plaid shirt with his hat on. And it was very iconic. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So I would remember the icon of that, and then I can kind of sort of fill in some of the visual details. But for me, it was more of just the emotion associated with it. That's what I feel the most. And then as I feel that emotion, then I start to fill in some details imagery wise.
Yeah.
That is the big challenge from all we've read, and we're reminded of it in this book as well, is that the struggle is in keeping these. Is not just imagining, but continuing to imagine, and maintaining conscious control of your thoughts as a result,
right.
as opposed to letting your mind think what it wants to think, which it does so well. We have all these habits in our lives, and the habits really are mental when it comes down to it. And they are, I guess there are neurological reasons why it's so, and we've talked about this before.
Yeah, the actual connecting neurons that form those memories. And so some of those connections are actually physically stronger than others,
right.
and some of them get weak over time. But the good news is we can generate new connections, and we can even strengthen old ones or new ones. We know how to do that now. And just to quickly go over it, the more you run the memory, quote unquote, the stronger the connection becomes. And of course, if you add emotion, research has shown that adding emotion to it actually tells the brain, this is important. Let's put some, what do you call, we call insulating, but it's not actually insulating, but put some actual extra reinforcement on this connection to make it stronger.
Right.
So now, does Goddard get into the whole thing about positive versus negative emotions and tying into one versus tying into the other?
No, but there's another book that he's written called Feeling is the Secret, and that one comes next. So we'll tell you next week.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fair enough.
He does talk about rewriting past memories for the purpose of erasing negative emotions associated with certain past memories and replacing them with positive emotions, often by just deciding that what happened didn't happen and what you wanted to happen did happen.
So he calls it revision. He actually gives you this whole protocol to follow, where he says at night before you go to sleep, you review the events of the day, and anything that didn't make you feel, happy and joyful, that you could recreate them, which might be easier for people who have problems visualizing, right? Because less creativity is required. It's already happened, so it's just a matter of changing it here and there. And then making it more favorable to you, such that it creates a positive memory and a positive emotion that's associated with it. And, he talks about the benefits of that for you. It helps you to, of course, erase the negative memory and emotions, but it helps you to find ways to recreate new memories and emotions. So it's almost not almost, it's changing what's being laid down in your subconscious. So.
Well, it's interesting you should mention that, because I am able to do that kind of mental rewriting now. But when I first started to explore this whole concept of the law of attraction and positive thinking and so forth, I had a lot of trouble with it at first. Basically, my scientific side of my mind would get in the way and say, well, that's not true. That isn't what happened. And there's a very strong human tendency, I think, to insist on sticking to the truth of what happened rather than allowing ourselves to change the fundamental memory to a more positive form.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that neuroscience has shown that we do that all the time. That, in fact, when we remember certain events, remembering, some neuroscientists believe, is just a recreating of the event. And so sometimes we add stuff that didn't happen, and we take away stuff, we misremember. And so the memories always are being recreated in one way or the other. So we're doing that whether we are aware of it or not. So now he's actually telling you to be more intentional about it, because there are benefits to doing it that way, so that you can recreate it more positively. Because I know from experience, I've had events that have happened to me in my childhood, and I'm sure they weren't half as bad as I remember them. and that's what tends to happen. You had a conversation with someone, and they might have said something what you didn't like or whatever, but then you rehash it over in your head, and it becomes worse and worse every time.
Oh, yeah. It's a very common thing. In fact, Joel talks about it a lot from his psychotherapy practice, where Now, people get caught into these never-ending loops of negative experience, and they just keep reliving stuff over and over and over again. And it's not just in therapeutic circles. I mean, you can see evidence of it in society at large. I mean, it's in politics, it's in the news, it's in almost every major aspect of our awareness. People just have this tendency to keep replaying old tapes. And sadly, so many of the old tapes are negative.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's why he's right. This is a skill that we need to learn, and I have been trying to learn it, and I have made progress. So I'm happy about that. I'm glad that I've made some progress, but I also have a ways to go. So onward and upward. That's the way I look at it.
That's right.
Are you less haunted by certain memories now? Is that the progress you've made?
How would I measure it? I don't. I'm not sure if it's about being less haunted by memories. I don't think that's really it. I think it's more of because I have been training myself to catch myself whenever I am focusing on something from the past, particularly if it's negative, and kind of flip the switch and say, no, I'm going to focus on this instead. And
right.
this being something that's current and positive. It's taken a long time to develop that habit, but slowly, painfully slowly, I have developed it to the point where now I can do it pretty consistently. I used to be haunted not so much by old memories, but by the tendency of my subconscious mind to feed me negative stuff, whether old memory or recent stuff or whatever, at the most inconvenient times. It felt like it was completely outside of my control.
Right.
Now, I have gotten really good at not only recognizing early on that it's happening, but stopping it.
Yes.
And replacing it with something else.
Yep.
Because that's the key. You have to replace it with something else. That's what has made the biggest difference for me anyway. Having, some little mechanism to kick into gear whenever I'm noticing, I'm focusing on all that crap again.
Yeah.
Time to switch over to how beautiful that blue sky is,
Yeah.
Or anything, petting the cat. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's something current and positive. And by sticking to that pattern of notice it, change, notice it, change, notice it, change, I've gotten to the point now where I don't really notice much about my past anymore. It doesn't really enter my head as much as it used to.
That's good.
Which is good. I hadn't even noticed that until you pointed out, Mark, that, how is it manifested? I hadn't really thought about it, but that's been the manifest. The manifest has been, I still get it. I still get stuff to happen. Don't get me wrong. I still get stuff coming in at the most inconvenient times, but it's a lot less frequent.
Yeah, yeah.
Which tells me I'm getting more control.
That's true. And the thing that tells you is what we've learned, not just from Neville Goddard, but all the other authors that we've read about what vibrational state you're in. So if your mind, your subconscious, whatever it is constantly feeding you memories that are not, positive, then your default vibration, as it were, is always the low one that attracts other negative things. And so the more you try to change that, you gradually raise your vibrations so that it becomes, the default is then higher than it used to be. And from a scientific point of view, right, so neuroscientists who don't necessarily believe in the law of attraction, they have shown that what happens is there are certain areas in your brain, and I've mentioned this before, in particular the amygdala, that is, among other things, known as the fight or flight or the fear or the frustration or whatever you want to label those negative energies. It's in charge of that. Ideally, it's designed to protect you from danger, right?
And where exactly is the amygdala, just so we can cover the physiology of it?
It's in the center of your brain, if you want to.
Okay. That's close enough. Yeah.
Two almond-shaped little balls kind of thing in the center of your brain. And so it's supposed to alert you to danger. But what happens is it becomes overworked and overexcited, and so it's almost stuck in a heightened state, and so it's easily aroused. And in some people, it's always aroused, And what happens is they've shown through imaging, they show that for some people, that part of when they take images of the brain, the amygdala is always red, orange, showing that it's always heightened and lots of blood is flowing there. But they've shown also that people who, one, meditate, they have reduced blood flow to the amygdala, because instead of the blood flowing to the amygdala, it flows to the frontal lobe, which allows you to then be more aware and to be more in control of your response to things that are happening. But they also show that with practice, you can reduce the size of your amygdala. So you can reduce the activity as well as the size of it, so that it doesn't become such a major force in your life. So I think your amygdala has gotten smaller.
On behalf of my amygdala, I thank you. Well, it's interesting because, as I mentioned, I'm reading. I've actually only just started. I'm about 20% into it, but I've been reading Shawn Achor's book, the sequel to The Happiness Advantage, called Before Happiness, subtitled "The 5 Hidden Keys to Achieving Success, Spreading Happiness, and Sustaining Positive Change." And as I mentioned before, his biggest concern that he's trying to answer with this book is, what do you do with somebody who is having trouble finding happy stuff to focus on?
Yeah.
And as he described in his introduction, he says, I began to realize that if we wanted to create a real, long-lasting, and sustainable change, we needed to show people how to fundamentally change their reality, the entire lens through which they viewed their world. Well, that's what you're talking about.
Yep, exactly, exactly.
And he provides 5 steps, which I haven't read in detail, but he does have an outline of them in the introduction. The 5 steps are, number 1, choose the most valuable reality. So that ties in directly with what Goddard's talking about. Mm-hmm. Number 2, map your meaning markers, how to identify and chart the best route to accomplishing your goals. Not quite sure what he means by that yet, but you can kind of get a sense for it. Yeah. Number 3, find the X spot, how to use success accelerants to propel you more quickly toward your goals. That sounds to me a lot like, if you're in the zone, more good things happen.
Right, yeah.
And then point number 4, cancel the noise, how to boost the signal that points to greater opportunities, possibilities, and resources. Well, canceling the noise, that sounds like what we were talking about in terms of turning off the amygdala.
The amygdala, definitely, yes.
Yeah. And then point number 5, create positive inception, how to amplify the effects of a positive mindset by transferring your positive reality to others. And that's a key point for him. I haven't gotten to that part of the book, but I just know from the Happiness Advantage, social connectivity plays a gigantic role in the success level of people. That the scientific studies keep showing that over and over and over again. Whoever is the most socially connected is the one who tends to be the most resilient, who tends to stay the most positive, who tends to have the best success, and so on and so forth. And that sounds like what he's kind of pointing to with this one. How to amplify the effects of a positive mindset by transferring your positive reality to others. So he's basically trying to come at that same point from the opposite direction. And that's what's got me wanting to read the rest of the book, to find out what that's about.
Yeah, as you were reading it, I immediately thought of I thought of the man whose name I forgot. The Apple founder. I can see him, a visual of my head.
Steve Jobs.
Yes, because the biographer mentioned in many places in the book how Steve had this reality distortion shield around him.
Yep.
And everywhere he went, people would get caught up in that reality distortion field, basically. It's almost as if he would, brainwash them into seeing reality the way he saw it, and it was an amazing ability that he had that contributed to his success.
Oh yeah, he had a very strong ability to not only imagine how things could be, but to convey that to other people in a way that was tangible. It had feeling, it had texture, it had reality, much far beyond what they were used to from their own minds. That's where I think the big attraction was with him.
And the other thing was that we read in the most famous TED Talk ever given, the one with the most views on YouTube, is the Begin with the Why, Remember that?
Oh, the guy with the target on his board.
I'm not sure if I don't know. I forgot all the visuals, but I remember where he said that companies that begin with the Y, they are successful, and companies who don't, they end up, going the way of TiVo.
Right. He mentioned that.
But he said that Apple, Steve Jobs, he didn't start out to create new computers or music tools or anything. He started out to give the customers an experience, which was, to feel very proud about this new, efficient, and beautiful tool that they own, and they would feel special, and so that's how he created the Apple computer and all the other tools that are part of the line. But yeah, so again, it's all about the emotions.
It's amazing how emotions become more and more important in our understanding of how our psychology works, how the universe works, how life works.
Yeah.
I have become more and more aware of how limited my own understanding was, say, 30 years ago, because I was trying very hard to stick to what I perceived to be scientific principles, scientific objectivism, and so on and so forth, not realizing that it was really doing was giving me the excuse to disconnect from my own emotional behaviors, which is exactly the opposite of what I needed to do. But they don't teach you that part, do they? You don't get a whole lot of scientific lectures from chemistry teachers saying tie into your emotions.
No, they don't. About 10 years ago, or maybe more, there was that book that became an immediate bestseller. You read it, The Emotional Quotient, where the author realized that the people who were successful were not the ones with the high IQ, but the ones with the high EQ.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it makes sense that would tie in with what Shawn Achor talks about, because he talks about having social connectivity. Well, people who have a high EQ are going to be socially connected.
Yes, definitely.
So there's definite correlation going on there.
It's amazing how everything is all tied together.
It does all tie together.
It does.
And you talked earlier about how when you tell a story, you start to embellish the story, and over time it turns into a new story in a sense, and contains details that are not even a part of what originally happened. Tying all this together in one more way, we mentioned Einstein before. Joel posted a little note, a quote from Einstein on his Facebook page.
Yeah.
And I looked at the quote. I don't remember what it was. I'll see if I can find it while I'm telling the story. But I looked at the quote, and it sounded very law of attraction.
Okay.
But it didn't sound like Einstein. I mean, it's certainly where law of attraction practitioners have taken the whole theory of quantum mechanics and so forth into the spiritual realm. It would fit that very nicely. But I didn't really remember Einstein going that far with it. So I looked at the quote, and sure enough, it's been attributed to Einstein by some guy in a book in 1996, but nobody can find any reference to Einstein actually saying it before then. Okay. So there's an example of, once again, the story being the life of Einstein being added to.
Yeah.
So now Einstein's being credited with saying something that's very New Agey that he never actually said. And that's where I think it's important to be able to recognize the difference between what it is we're telling ourselves that is fictional and recognizing that it is fictional, so that we're doing it for a deliberate, constructive purpose, and telling fiction for the purpose of basically distorting the truth. Yeah. Changing people's minds and so forth.
I have, since learning about the law of attraction and seeing the world from that new perspective, there are people I believe are either consciously or not actually practitioners of the law of attraction.
Oh, and yeah.
Einstein was definitely one of them, because I like we've talked before, there are movies that are definitely all about the law of attraction, and so I happen to think that a lot of writers in Hollywood and producers and other celebrities and other successful people, when they talk about how they live their lives and what they believe, it's very law of attraction. I think a lot of them, for whatever reason, are not going to actually come out and say LOA. But some of the things that they say and do, it's like, he's a practitioner, she's a practitioner.
Yeah, well, I think we're all practitioners, really. We just don't know it.
Well,
we often practice it to our own detriment, but the act of focusing makes you a practitioner. If you focus on something in your life and you can't do otherwise, you have to, because that's what happens when you live. You're always focused on something. If you focus on something, you're engaged in the law of attraction. Mm-hmm. So it's actually unavoidable. Sorry, guys, you can't avoid it.
Yeah, but I think a lot more people are actually deliberately practicing, having been exposed one way or the other, and have embraced it, and are like, okay, that's how I do this.
Particularly over the last 20 years, and even over the last 10 years since The Secret came out, because that really just kind of exploded the whole thing in the public consciousness.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. I think it's becoming a lot more of a deliberate thing. Interestingly enough, it's also resisted. There is still a tremendous amount of resistance to the whole concept. But I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think it's fair to say that the large majority of people think it's nonsense. Mm-hmm. Large majority of people think that it's wishful thinking, that it's, reality is reality and you can't change it, and so on and so forth.
Certainly not with your mind.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I am no way responsible for my crappy life. Are you kidding me?
Well, speaking of that, I subscribe to an email list put out by Abraham Hicks, and one of the messages that came through on I subscribed to that one, but I also subscribed to Mike Dooley's list.
Universe, yes.
That's right, the Notes from the Universe guy. And he came up with something that went out just a few days ago. I'll see if I can find it. But it essentially nailed down this whole concept of we are responsible for everything that happens in our lives, which is a tough concept. That's one that gives people a lot of trouble. It's given me a lot of trouble.
It does, especially when you bring in children suffering into that. It's really controversial.
Oh yeah, it becomes more than controversial. People resist it. They say, "Well, that doesn't make any sense anymore," and so forth. Okay. But let's see, can I find it here? Well, this isn't the one, but here's one that actually comes at it from the other side, so to speak. It's rather challenging, he says, for those here being the other side, the non-physical side, the spiritual side, if you will. It's challenging for those here who've never experienced time and space to actually grasp how formidable you sometimes think your illusions are, because, quite frankly, they see the world around you as just more you. Mm. Well, that means literally we are responsible for creating our own experience in our lives, and we're not the victims that so many of us think that we are.
Right. Yeah, it's one of the quotes that Neville shared in the book. I don't know why I call him by his first name. It sounds like a last name. I think that's why. But he quotes Blake where he said, "We are led to believe a lie when we see with, not through the eye." So it talks about, the reality of the world that we are experiencing, and it's because of our perception. You see, you believe. What's the quote says? You see what you believe, and if you change your belief, you'll see You see your belief. You see something. Your life will be completely different. It's like the idea of there could be things around you that you're just not aware of because, firstly, you may not even believe that they exist, or other reasons. But the minute you change your belief, the world around you doesn't change, but you see different things. And so it's all a matter of the one who's doing the looking and the perception or the perspective from which they're looking.
I actually found the Abraham Hicks ones. It was Abraham Hicks, and there were two of them, so I'll read them both.
Okay.
The first one actually comes from one of their talks that they gave in 1999. It says, whatever you are giving your attention to is already vibrating. And when you give your attention to it, if you maintain your focus for as little as 17 seconds, you begin to include its vibration, whatever it is, in your vibration. When you see something you want and you give it your attention and you say yes to it, you are including whatever its vibration is in your vibration. When you see something you do not want and you shout no at it, you are including whatever its vibration is in your vibration. So in this vibrational world, which is everything, you are far more vibrational beings than you are verbal beings.
Yeah.
Very key point there. You are communicating with everyone far more on a vibrational basis than you are on a verbal basis, and you're doing it by what you're paying attention to.
Right. Yeah, definitely. That's sobering indeed.
Yeah, it is. In fact, the other one also kind of really nails it home. This actually came today. It's not necessary for you to exacerbate your contrast with struggle in order to get into a higher place. It's not necessary to suffer in order to give birth to desire. But when you have suffered and you have given birth to desire, well, so what? You've got a desire. Turn your attention to the desire. Think about where you're going, and never mind where you've been. Don't spend any more time justifying any of that stuff. Well, that's what I've been trying to do for the last 10 years. Learn how to focus on where I'm going, not where I've been, on what I like and not what I don't like. And they're right. The more that you focus on that, the more good things happen.
Yeah, because, the work, quote unquote, it happens within. It's what's happening in your mind, in your thoughts, in your subconscious, more so than, what steps or what actions you take. And that's what I'm learning slowly, so painfully slowly, because I'm always thinking of what to do next, what I got to do, what work is involved, how I'm going to negotiate this, as opposed to sitting down and trying to recreate the event, whatever it is in my mind first, and then let the feeling direct what action, what steps I take. One of my favorite authors always says, it's one of his quotes, Gary Zukov. He says, if you don't go within, you will always go without.
That's essentially the difference between a human being and a human doing.
Yes.
Yes, and human being is much better.
Yes.
Not that doing is bad, doing is good, but the being comes first.
Right, because we grew up in a society that just taught us, you got to do, work, be, you got to do, you're made to do kind of thing, because if they say, you want this, well, go work for it or whatever, so you always feel like you have to work. Nobody taught you how to sit quietly with your mind and create it within first and let that then be.
Right. And to trust that that's actually going to work.
Yes, that's the other thing.
And I have to say that experience that you just described of do, that's what led me to realize that this whole wacky law of attraction thing may actually have something to it. Because the scientific part of my mind said, well, I keep working hard, and I don't get anywhere.
Yeah, I know. That should be
that's a big warning sign right there.
But we still don't get it, like I said that to myself, the fact that I'm still not where I want to be should be clue number one that I'm going about it the wrong way, but yet I keep doing the same thing.
Well, fortunately, we're making progress. We're not stuck. We're moving forward, and that's why we continue to study this stuff. That's why we continue to read these books. That's why Joel and I keep doing the radio show, and why you guys step in to do the show with me, because we want to change our way of thinking about this stuff, because we know that there's benefit to it. We know that it's valuable. So thank you for sharing your insights this week. Let's do it again next week, because Joel needs a couple weeks to get used to his new gig directing this big operation he's directing. But I'm glad that you guys are willing to set in, because it takes me back to when we did it every single week. So thank you again for sitting in. I appreciate it.
And I remember how good it felt, and I feel that now. So
it does. It really works, doesn't it?
The feeling back to my reality.
And we'll get to do it next week too. So we'll invite you all to join us next week as well here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.